Hey there, podcast family, and welcome back to Comfort and Chaos. This is part two of my interview with Sinasta Colucci. If you haven't caught part one, I totally recommend you go back and listen to that because it will provide a lot of backstory and context to this conversation today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing the guest because I want to spend the time having the conversation. But just to briefly catch you up where we left off, Sinasta was a simple 21-year-old kid who was in college, but the college path wasn't really working for him. So he decided to try something different. And his goal was to join a community of people who were looking out for one another, who were growing their own food, who were self-sufficient, yet could share. And he thought he had found that when he went to Missouri. But the real truth of what he found when he got to the farm was a lot more than that, as you came to understand in the last episode. Where we left off was, well, a bit chilling. We started to discuss the way the 12 Tribes cult approaches raising children in the community. And if you know anything about the 12 Tribes cult before listening to this episode, you know that's one of the main criticisms and investigations of this cult. So where we pick up is a bit hard to listen to. And I want to extend a trigger warning for topics of abuse, sexual abuse, violence, etc. If that's too much for you, then by all means, go ahead and skip the first 5 minutes of this episode. And without taking any more of your time, here is part two of my interview with Sinasta Colucci. Enjoy.
We all are here together just to learn about ourselves and how we can take care of everybody else. Living on a planet that is circling the drain, we do the best we can to not just go insane. It's comfort and chaos.
And if I'm correct here, Yonik referred to children as, I guess, incomplete in terms of their understanding of God, and I'd even heard it, this may be incorrect, maybe you can clarify, but that children can be viewed as Satan in training.
Yeah, they do have a negative view of young children, and I believe it to be psychologically damaging. They think that children are born evil and that you have to beat the evil out of them. So they use they call them balloon sticks, little like flexible rods. They're thin wooden rods that they use on them, and it's supposed to like leave a mark on their bottoms.
Did you have any firsthand visual experience of seeing that go down in your
I
time?
have seen it, yeah. Yeah, I have seen it.
Was it
And
pretty jarring as an adult to see?
yeah, I mean, my mom never spanked me, and that was one of the hardest things for me to accept being there. That and the racism is just like my first instinct is just, this is horrible.
Yeah.
And then, but it was like ingrained into me, like instilled in me that I was the one that was wrong, and that to question God's way is evil.
Yeah. Right. That's just awful. And I've even heard stories that parents, who are in the middle of using these rods on their children, something snaps in them and they're asking themselves, why am I doing this? And even parents who decided, or like a father who decided they're not going to use the rods anymore.
Yeah.
The mother would find someone else in the community to
Right.
discipline their children.
That's another scary thing too, is basically any adult can, take a child into the bathroom, pull their pants down and spank them. And it's just, yeah, the kids have no freedom, no protection from abuse.
Or even maybe worse in some scenarios.
Yeah, like when I say abuse, I mean like every horrible abuse
Sexual
imaginable.
abuse.
I'm sure all of that occurs.
Yeah.
I never witnessed it personally, but I'm sure it does happen.
Yeah.
It's like an environment that it's almost like it's a welcoming sign for predators. Like they find out about this place where they can, yeah. I don't even want to go into that, but I think there are
Yeah.
certain places that just appeal to predators. Churches in general,
There are
I would
some
say.
examples within and without of the community, in other communities, that this has obviously taken place. And the real sense of protection that a cult provides is that you don't talk about things that
Right.
threaten the existence of it. So,
Yeah, they try to handle those things internally, and their form of punishment is not going to cut it, really, to be
right.
honest. I mean, dealing with a predator, it's basically like they'll give them a slap on the wrist, like tell them that they need to confess their sins and then maybe get rebaptized.
Sure. Send them to a new community or something.
Yeah, instead of going to prison, they get dunked in the water. Like, that's obviously not going to cut it as far as punishment.
Right. Totally. And as you said, you had mentioned your fears of racism from the get-go, but you stepped on the farm and there was this black gentleman working there, and so for a moment you felt at ease, but then you just brought up recently how in fact racism was pretty rampant in the community.
Yeah, I didn't know the extent of it until I had been there a while, more than a year, probably about 2 years. Um, which I in hindsight, I think that's kind of abnormal. I think they normally tell people um, the teachings about race sooner than that, but I don't know, for whatever reason I was uh, late to the game. But they have what's called the Ham teaching, and this is one of my biggest criticisms. I'm sure that's hard to believe that this could be the biggest, but um, just the fact that they're not open with their teachings. Like, it's one thing that they do all these evil things. It'd be another thing if they were upfront about it. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
If you go to their website, they're going to say, this is what we believe, and they're going to show you all the great sparkling things that they know aren't going to be too controversial.
Right. But if they were upfront about
But
it,
they
then
hide,
they would
yeah,
be then they would be investigated far more often than they already are.
right. But at least, like, the people that join, that's what they're into. Like, when you join the clan, you're not the
There's no
people that
illusions about what it's
yeah, the
about.
people that join the clan know what they're getting into. They're like,
Sure.
yeah, this is where we hate minorities. Like, yeah, this is if you hate minorities, this is the place to go.
Right.
Okay, great. Here I am. I'm in my place, right? Like, but they don't do that. It's like you think, oh no, these people are just harmless hippies, and all these rumors about them are wrong.
Yeah.
So one of their teachings is the Ham teaching, which comes from the story of Noah and the Great Flood, Genesis 9, chapter 9. So Noah had three sons. In Hebrew, it's Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And Ham was disrespectful to his father. And so Noah cursed the descendants of Ham. The way it's worded in the Bible, it says Canaan. Canaan was Ham's son. So if you're cursing the son's descendants, you're basically cursing his descendants, right?
Yeah.
So in the 12 tribes, it's referred to as the descendants of Ham, or Hamites, which is like the plural of people that belong to that race.
Okay.
And so they teach that the three sons went their three separate ways, and from there, humanity evolved into three distinct races, which is it's really hard to hear that as a mixed race person,
Right.
because I don't feel like there's like these distinctions inside of me. But
Sure.
So they teach that Ham is all the black people are Hamites. Shem is all the white people. They're Shemites. Which incidentally, that's where the word Semite comes from, like Semitic,
Oh,
Jewish.
interesting.
Yeah, it comes from Shem. Japheth would be all the Asians, which they migrated to North America, became Native Americans. So Asians and Native Americans are considered Japheth.
Okay.
And you're probably thinking, well, what about everybody else? Because yeah, there are a lot more than three in the world, but that's just what they teach, is that there's only three: Ham, Shem, and Japheth, whites, blacks, and Asians. So that's I know it sounds very unscientific, because it is,
Because
but
surely it is, right?
yeah, but that's what they teach. And Ham was cursed, and his curse was to be a slave to Shem.
Mm.
So all of Ham's descendants are cursed into slavery, which essentially, I'm sure you could fill in the dots there. That's saying that God ordained race-based slavery,
Right.
that blacks by God's word are to be enslaved by whites. And yes, the 12 tribes do believe that. They believe that the only path to righteousness for black people is to be slaves to white people.
Mm. In the same way that, as you mentioned before, there's the righteous, and then there's the, what was the term you used?
Yeah, so there's the holy, the righteous, and the filthy and unjust.
Right. So the people who don't know the gospel but still live
Right.
a good life, but they're going to be servants to.
The righteous are supposed to be submissive, hardworking. It's weird, yeah. There's a hierarchy even among the righteous in the minds of the 12 tribes. Like if you're white out in the world, you can basically be an individual.
You're
But if you're
already above.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're already above the others. But if
Mm.
you're black, then your only path to righteousness is to be submissive to the whites.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bad. And no, they don't just like come out and tell the world that this is what they teach.
Right.
But it has an impact on internally, like the black children that are born and raised in the community are going to have an inferiority complex, and the white children, when they're around the black children, are going to have this superiority complex where, like, I'm the boss and you have to listen to me.
Wow.
And that's the internal, dynamics within the community.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yes, it is.
Did you feel that sense in your own self on the farms or in the communities that people treated you inferiorly?
After hearing that teaching, it definitely changed my mindset a lot, and I was like hypersensitive to it after that.
I can imagine.
Because they believe, since my father is black and they believe the lineage is through the father, they believe that I'm a Hamite.
That must have been difficult to reckon with in your own self.
Yeah, it was. I wanted so much for like everything else they taught to be true. I think I was just in a really vulnerable place mentally.
Yeah. So you had this moment after the woman in the community passed of the cancer. You learned about the dishonesty, and it kind of hits you that, okay, I'm being lied to in a lot of ways, but I'm still going to go through these motions because I'm here and I have to survive. At what timeline was that? Did that hit you? And was that sort of a blossoming of your desire to get out, so to speak? Like what was the time of that process?
Yeah, it definitely opened the floodgates. Like I started, as soon as I could start to acknowledge the faultiness, the fallibility of the community, it sort of just opened up the door for questioning other things too.
Yeah.
So I remember pretty clearly one night, I was preparing for the gathering by reading the Bible. So I was being obedient, doing what I was supposed to do, and I was reading about Moses. And Okay, you have to understand for context too. I went to Wayne State University and I was majoring in history,
Right.
and I was taught there like how to interpret stories as objectively as to like whether they're true or not.
Right.
When was this written? Who's telling this story? If you have people from both sides, then it's more likely to be true. Like
Yeah.
a good example would be the Vikings and the English. We know that the Vikings attacked these unarmed monks in England because on the English side they talked about these brutal attacks that were just completely merciless and unjust, and on the Viking side they were bragging about it. They were like, look at these idiots, they don't even have weapons and they've got gold.
Right.
They're like bragging about what they
Yeah.
did. So as a historian you read that and you're like, yeah, we know that happened.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there preparing for the gathering, reading the Bible, and I'm reading the story of Moses, and it's like, wait a minute, he was on the mountain alone. Who's writing this, and
Yeah.
who's telling us this story? And he's having a conversation with God, and it seems like, okay, this is a rather extraordinary claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Like all of a sudden, all this logic and objective reasoning came back to me, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so here's this man. Does he have any like? Does he have a reason to lie? Well, he's the leader of all these people.
Yeah.
He got them to follow him somehow. So, there's a story where God is like, I'm going to destroy all the Israelites. They're a rebellious people. And so Moses sort of pleads with God, like, don't destroy them. And then God changes his mind. Quite an extraordinary story, but he was alone on the mountain when he's having this conversation with God. And then he comes down from the mountain and he tells the people about the conversation. And it's kind of like, wait a minute. So he's like telling these people, God wanted to kill you all, but I got him to change his mind. So you're welcome. Like,
Right.
you better follow me. That was sort of like one of the epiphanies I had of maybe this whole Bible thing isn't entirely, literally true.
Right. It's a pretty
And
epic fictional tale if you look at it from that way.
right. And then, of course, later on, I started to even question whether Moses existed at all, because that story, allegedly takes place hundreds, if not thousands of years before it was actually written down. And then the fact that there's similarities to the Moses story and Sargon of Akkad and on and on. There's just a lot of reason to believe that maybe it didn't happen.
Right.
But I think personally, what was going on with me, like spiritually and mentally and all that, is like I really wanted to be obedient and serve God, and I thought that if I did all the right things, that I'd be rewarded for it. And one of the really big turning moments, I think I never recovered from it actually, is I was sent out evangelizing. Like, they want to preach the gospel to outsiders. Christians are considered outsiders. So there
Yeah.
was like this big Christian convention in Springfield, Missouri, and it wasn't planned. I wasn't prepared for it. It was a warm spring day in Missouri, and I was wearing a t-shirt, and someone just grabbed me and said, we got to go to this event and preach the gospel. So I just like got in the car with them and
Yeah.
drove off. And then that evening we're at the event and the wind comes in and it's just like brutally cold. All of a sudden it drops like 40 degrees. Missouri weather is harsh. I mean,
Right.
it can go from like hot to cold
Pretty
fast.
bipolar. Yeah.
And I was just in a t-shirt. I've got sickle cell anemia, and it triggered a crisis. That's what they call it when there's intense pain.
Yeah.
And I did not have pain pills. I didn't have, any way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I just quietly suffered that night, just laying awake all night in extreme pain, thinking, I wonder if this is what the lake of fire is like. And I remember thinking, like, how can a righteous God punish me for this? Like, I thought I was just doing what he wanted me to do. I was being obedient and preaching the gospel. And this is how he's going to repay me for that. Like,
Right.
so I started, think, I don't think I ever recovered from that incident. I think that was that was when I just stopped believing altogether.
I can, yeah, because you're taught that if you do the right things, if you are obedient and you're being a servant to God, He's going to take care of you.
Right.
And here you are doing exactly that.
And being
And
punished for it. Yeah.
right. And so even if you're still in a place of believing that there is such a God, you're not really in good uh, relationship with Him. You know, that's not really a very cool God, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was a point of kind of, yeah, like you said, you never recovered from that. And so you went home from this, and then how long did it take you to decide this just wasn't for you and you needed to go? I mean, because you're in your mid late 20s at this point, right?
Yeah, I was 28.
Right. And I can only imagine I'm 30 now, and through my 20s, I mean, I've desired things like relationships or whatnot. And,
Yeah, that was a big part of it too.
and they're very restrictive on if you're a single person in the community, you there's only a very strict path to having a relationship. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have what's called a waiting period, and it's not even like it's hard to explain. It's not even like, oh, I like her, she likes me. That has to be part of it, but it's a thing of like the important people in the community that decide, okay, is this going to be a good couple together? And it has to be the right people that decide that too. It's a weird authority thing, but the community has social meetings, is what they call them, and that's where the older, the married couples that have been there the longest within each community,
Yeah.
they get together and have meetings, and they're in charge of all the social issues. Every social aspect of the community is controlled by this group of couples that has their weekly
Wow.
meeting.
And they're having this meeting separate from the rest of the community.
Yeah,
So
nobody else is involved. So
they're
it's
coming
going
up
to
with a
be,
game plan and then
yeah.
dispersing it through you.
So it's going to be the community's leader and his wife, and then the next higher up and his wife, and the next higher up and his wife, and that's pretty much it.
Wow.
It's usually like 3 or 4 couples, give or take.
And so did you find yourself at that point you're starting to really struggle with the belief in any of it? Did you find yourself wanting a relationship or just something else? Was that part of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always wanted to be, a husband and a father, and I had been in a waiting period in the community, and they kind of like jerked me around. Nate would always say that it shouldn't take more than 3 months to decide, whether a couple is right for each other. The waiting period I was in, it took 9 months, and it was like off and on for a
Wow.
lot. So like it really played with my emotions a lot. And then later on, there was a young woman that joined the community through the WOOF program, Willing Workers on Organic Farms, and she actually expressed her desire to get to know me first, and like she told me,
Yeah.
which is not the way to go about it in the
You're
community,
not
but
supposed to have a one-on-one
right.
blossoming of any kind of romance or anything without express permission.
Yeah, but it was also at the same time it was entirely their fault. I mean, they were really stupid about it. Even by their own standards, it was their fault. Like, because they broke their own rules.
Yeah.
Basically, she showed up and she said she's interested in learning about gardening, and so they're like, "Oh, okay, go work with him alone in that huge garden where nobody can see you."
Yeah.
So it's like, and I actually, when they told me that I was going to be teaching her, I got angry with them and I said that I didn't want to.
Right.
And basically they forced me to be with her. And then
Wow.
she ended up like, it was really tempting. Like, she's a beautiful young woman, and we had all the same interests.
Right.
and she was always like smiling at me, and her eyes would sparkle, and it was just really tempting.
I can imagine. I mean, and
I like
you've been kind of in an isolated position for quite some time, and or not, maybe not isolated, but
I wanted to be. I was gonna
restricted.
say that. It's funny. It's a funny segue. I was gonna say that one of the things I fantasized about basically my whole life was just being alone in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And she looked up at me with that smile and sparkle in her eyes, and she said, "You want to go out to the wilderness with me?" Like she really like that's what she wanted to do. Was,
Yeah.
you know, she wanted to go to Utah. It's like, okay, sure, let's go.
Yeah. And so that probably sparked a whole nother thing inside of you of envisioning a life outside of the community. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
So ultimately we got in trouble, and she ended up getting baptized after we got in trouble. Because I was the one to really be in trouble. Like for her, it wasn't even that bad. Like they just said, "Oh yeah, I mean, of course, that's normal behavior, especially for an outsider. She's never
right.
heard the gospel." Like
But
it
you know
wasn't like she
better.
was in trouble. It was like, but for me, I was disconnected. Cut off. It's the terminology they use, where you. Well, I'm trying to like think of how to explain this to
Sure.
outsiders, but
Yeah.
there's like the symbolism. I can explain that pretty simply. Like in the gatherings, we wear these headbands. They're called diadems, and uh, so if you're not in unity with the rest, if you're considered to, how do I explain that? Yeah, you don't wear your headband in the gathering. You don't lift your hands to pray with everybody else,
Because you're acting
but
in dissidence to
yeah,
the
but
beliefs.
spiritually they see it as like the Holy Spirit has left you,
Ah.
and um and then socially, like it's like this shunning.
Right. You're
Like
cast out in a
you even have this physical, visible thing that everybody can look upon to shame you.
right.
Like you're just standing there without your diadem.
Right.
And at the beginning of all the gatherings, you're going around, you hug people, you say shalom. And if you're not wearing a diadem, the first assumption is, oh, he forgot his diadem. So they say, did you forget your diadem? And they look at you with that, suspicious look. Did you forget your diadem? And if you say no, they go, oh, okay. And they back away. It's like, oh, okay. So you're cut off.
Right.
Yeah.
It's to shame you, punish you, make you feel cast out, embarrassed. And it's a warning to anyone that's watching. See, you don't want to feel like him, so don't
Exactly.
do what
Yeah.
he did.
And you can watch in their gatherings the people that are cut off. When everyone else stands in the circle, they go in closer together. The ones that are cut off have to stay apart from the circle. So they stand back towards the wall and they lower their heads in shame as everyone else is lifting up their eyes to the sky and they've got their hands up and praying. And then they'll of course pray for you to come to your senses and
Right. To
receive
be
the Holy Spirit
redeemed.
and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be redeemed.
Wow. It must have been very uncomfortable.
It is, yeah, especially when it's like a woman involved, like it's like it's a sex.
It's an extra layer of
But
shame.
we didn't like have sex. I put my arm on her back, and that was like seen as just a horrible thing to do. Like put my arm around her.
Who was there? Who found out? Like, how did they find out that you put your...
I told them right away as soon as it happened because I felt guilty.
Wow.
And they they had a lot of harsh words for me. Like they literally labeled me as a sexual predator because they saw her as just being this, innocent sheep that came into the community, and it was my job to lead her spiritually, and I abused her innocence by putting my hand on her back.
Wow.
Yeah.
I shudder to think in what world that is considered
Right.
as such. And so she chose to be baptized shortly after that. Probably.
Yeah, and they sent her to Colorado. They separated us immediately.
Okay. So that was the end of that.
Yeah.
I see. Wow. And probably was a furthering of your distancing from it, I would assume, maybe?
Yeah, that was one of the things they lied to me about a lot. Is um, initially they sent me to Warsaw, Missouri. That's how I ended up in Warsaw, and they said I was gonna be there for. They said it in a poetic way, but I assumed it to be a few months because it was in the summer when they sent me there, and I said, when will I be able to come back? They said when the leaves start changing color. So like obviously I assumed I'd be back in the fall, which was just a few months away,
Right.
and it wasn't until the next spring that I found myself back at the farm in Wablo.
Okay.
So that was one lie, but then I had asked them like if we'd be able to go on a waiting period. They said we'll talk about it in the leaders meeting, and then the leaders meeting came and went. And I asked, "Did you talk about it?" They said, "No, we got a lot more important things to discuss."
Wow.
But it's like you told me you're gonna do it, so why didn't you do it? You know, like that's how I took it. Like I'm like,
Right. Because
okay, so
honesty is
that's a
so,
lie. You
yeah,
know, you just lied to me.
honesty is so expected and
Yeah,
supposedly celebrated. So you're expecting the same treatment back.
yeah. So then I did end up eventually being able to come back to the farm um, the next spring, but that's when she was sent to Colorado, so we still didn't get to see each other.
Mm. And in this time, were you in any communication with any family or friends on the outside?
My mother and sister visited me in the community. They were the only family members to visit me while I was there.
Wow. And were they concerned at all when they came to visit or
Initially, they were very concerned. I think they kind of just started accepting it more and more.
yeah.
And after years had gone by, they just accepted that was my life.
Yeah. And so, as you began to question if this was in fact your life, if this was what you were going to be doing with the quote unquote rest of your life, were you expressing to your mother or your sister, a desire to make a change, to leave?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't asking anybody for help on the outside, and I didn't want to express any weakness. And I still felt like the need to, I guess, show a bold front to the world. Like
Yeah,
to paint the community in a positive light and not be a disgrace to them.
right.
I For whatever reason I still felt that need, and the turning point as far as me being able to leave came uh, in the summer of 2012. My sister on the outside, she got married in northern Michigan, and there was another family living on the farm in Missouri. The wife um, and mother in that family, uh, she was raised in Michigan, so she had relatives on the outside that were also in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so my sister invited me to her wedding, and I didn't want to go, and I didn't think that the leaders were going to send me, but I felt like I had to do my duty to ask them.
Yeah,
So I went and asked permission, not even wanting to go, and
right.
they said yes, and they had me go with this other family that also had roots in Michigan. So it's like
Mm,
this is from in their minds, it's like they were looking for an opportunity to kind of spread out, and Michigan was a place of interest for them too.
I'm
They
sure.
didn't At that point they didn't have a community in Michigan yet, and they really wanted to do a lot of evangelizing. So they sent us up there with free papers, and which is what they call their pamphlets.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to my sister's wedding, and her and I, we have different fathers. but her father was like a stepdad to me, and
Yeah.
he had a farm, just beautiful, beautiful land in northern Michigan. House that he built himself, well, with the help of construction workers. And you look out at this like rich, fertile valley near
Yeah.
that house, and
Right.
it's just it's a farmer's dream.
Sure.
And I stayed at his place. I think the family, like, they got a motel room or something, but I stayed with my stepdad and on his farm, and he looked at me and he said, if you ever need a place to stay, you're always welcome here.
Mm.
And I just took that to heart. I believed he was being genuine, like he was genuinely welcoming me there. and
Yeah.
and that was the first time when I actually had like opportunity to leave the community.
And so, yeah, I can imagine when you don't feel like you have options, the one you're currently in is the best option.
Yeah.
So to go somewhere that's not only welcoming, but also has that sense of, like you said, what you really got into this to begin with was you wanted to grow food, you wanted to live closer to the land, and you kind of saw as your beliefs were starting to erode, you saw that you could have a life that involved those things that did not involve the beliefs.
Right.
So that must have felt, maybe a bit lightening to the load on your conscious, maybe.
Yeah, and I did think that it was going to be a lot easier, life outside the community.
Yeah, because it's like you said, it's even the bare minimum is just so much work and so much toil, no
Right.
leisure.
Yeah.
And so you left the wedding and probably went back to the farm, I assume.
Yeah, we did go back to Missouri. Um, there were a lot of temptations along the way. We stayed. So the wedding was in northern Michigan. The woman community lady that had family in Michigan. Her family lived in southern Michigan,
Uh huh.
and so we stayed at her family's place the last night there. And the room they put me in, it was like a dank basement room, and it had like a stack of porno mags under the bed, and it was like, I hadn't seen those like my whole time in the community. I hadn't
Sure.
been watching porn or anything. It was like that was tempting. And then
Yeah, I can imagine your brain was just like, I mean, so there's being desensitized and then there's being sensitized, and you were incredibly sensitized to any media that probably portrayed
exactly, yeah.
attraction or sexuality.
So then the next morning, the man of the house wanted to take his grandkids, the community kids, to the zoo in Detroit, and I had friends in Detroit, and so I ended up meeting up with them, which is it's crazy to think, like, the community, as guarded as they are during this trip, it's supposed to be like evangelical, so you're encouraged to connect with these outsiders.
Right.
But it left me, the way I saw it at the time, like in a spiritual sense, very vulnerable to all of my old ways. And
Mm.
so I met up with some old friends from Detroit, and um, they were talking about, just cruising Belle Isle, which is like an island park
Uh huh.
in Detroit, right on the Detroit River, just cruising for pussy,
Yeah.
and like the way they talked, it was like, on the
Sure.
one hand, I it was jarring to me, but on the other hand, I was like, these guys are just kind of normal. Like, this is just
Right. They're
normal to
free.
them.
They're
Like, this
free
is their
to say
culture.
things. They're free to
Right.
have desires and be silly and
Yeah,
yeah.
it was like, this is their culture, and this is what's normal to them, and they would never accept the culture of the 12 tribes, which, when you think about it, is kind of a blend between biblical, but then also like southern white male oriented culture.
Right.
It was created by a Southern white male.
Right.
So of course that's what it's gonna evolve to, and that's when it started getting me like really. Obviously, that wasn't the beginning of my questioning. I've already like gotten into that, but
Yeah.
that was another really big thing for me. Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to believe in this God that created the entire universe. There's all these cultures. Who's to say which one's better than the? Did God really create the entire universe only to favor the culture of the Southern white man?
Mm.
Like, is that really? He created these guys too here in
Right.
Detroit. Like,
Seems
they're
oddly
they,
convenient, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and they would never accept that culture, and that's not fair to them. Should they
Right.
burn in hell for eternity for not accepting the culture of the Southern white man?
Mm.
Like, it didn't seem right to me.
Right. So all these things start to stack up on top of each other, and I can imagine a lot of emotions, anger, guilt,
Right.
etc., start to bubble up. But eventually, it becomes a concrete thing, not just this abstract. Oh well, what if? Or the general questioning begins to turn into a genuine desire or plan to change your life.
Yeah, and plus all of that together with the opportunity, with my
Exactly.
stepdad literally offering me a place to stay. And that was really, when it gets down to it, that was the main reason I hadn't already left is, if I had the opportunity, I would have been gone.
Right. Well, because there are stories of people who've left the community. They reach a breaking point. They reach a point of, or they're cast out. Right. There's always the potential that the community rejects you,
Right.
and then they are actually homeless.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
have nothing left
You
because
gave
they've
up everything when you joined, so you have nothing when you leave.
right. You don't even have your name anymore. So
Yeah.
if you have nothing on the outside, and a lot of people gave up their relationships to their families on the outside too.
Exactly. Yeah. They teach you to burn your bridges.
Mm. And so that's, I think, what keeps a lot of people stuck, and you were given an offering to become unstuck, right?
Right. Yep.
And so did you take that? Was that the your ticket out, so to speak?
Yep. That is how I eventually got out. There was another young woman in the community, and I had met her in March of 2012, and
So this was just when you were getting back to the farm, your original place.
um, so I knew her already when I went to my sister's wedding, and
Okay.
then so yeah, I come back and I'm like ready to go, and she was also in a place of like wanting to leave as well.
Right.
And she was talking about hitchhiking down to Springfield. I was like, you don't have to do that. And explained to her my stepdad had a farm and we could go there together. And um,
That must have felt pretty nice to not only meet someone that you maybe felt attraction to, but who also was sharing similar, uh, feelings and desires
feelings
to
at the same
change.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely like a right place, right time
Yeah.
type of moment. So yeah, we ended up leaving together, and no, it was not easy
Mm.
on the outside. It was not easier than living in the community. We um, ended up in northern Michigan in late November as
Yeah.
the snow was starting to fall and the ground was freezing, and the farm was very isolated, rural. We didn't have a vehicle of our own,
Mm-hmm.
and we were expected to get a job, and we had to like walk for miles in the snow in either direction to get to the nearest town.
Yeah.
There were two towns that were basically like 4 miles in either direction. Four
Wow.
miles to the north was a town, 4 miles to the south was another town. So we're like, okay, one day we'll walk to Bel Air, the next day we'll walk to Central Lake, and it's like,
Wow.
I remember filling out applications and people looking at me really suspiciously,
Sure.
like, who is this guy? Like, what's his work history? And obviously, I didn't have any like valid worldly credentials I can point to. The only references I had were inside the community.
Right.
One of the references I gave was literally the guy that painted me as being a sexual predator. So I'm like, how do I get a job with this?
Oh my gosh.
I ended up finding work for a lumber company early in the spring, splitting firewood and planting trees and stuff. Then I ended up in the hospital again.
Right, because it's cold. It's
Yeah,
northern Michigan in the wintertime. If anybody's been to any part of Michigan or those upper states in that time period, it's freezing, and you have sickle
yeah,
cell anemia.
yeah. Finally, I got work at a local farm. It was like the largest organic farm in the county, Providence Farm in Antrim County, Michigan. And that was long-term work for a couple years. I did end up marrying Molly, the woman that I left with, and we had a son together. And during the time that my son was born, I was working two jobs. I was working night shift at a grocery store, and then in the mornings I would go to the farm and I'd pick produce all morning. And we were living at that point. We had been kicked off the farm because of Molly's attitude, and she was pretty disrespectful to Dan, my stepdad, and
Yeah.
we got kicked off. We were living in a borrowed RV.
Wow.
And my son was born in October, so it was like this urgency to get out of the RV
Yeah.
so we could stay warm in the winter.
Sure.
There's a lot going on. It was very tough. And then I found out that Molly had a mental illness that was ongoing since she was a teenager. A lot of addiction problems, and now, fast forward a few years.
Are you guys still?
No, we've been separated for like 2.5 years,
Okay.
and I've been a single dad.
Wow.
But now I'm a chemical operator. Work for a major pharmaceutical company. I don't know if I should name drop them here. I don't know if they would even want me to
Sure.
have their name
we'll just
on
call
this
them
platform.
a large chemical.
But yeah, I'm a chemical operator now. I've had lots of different jobs throughout the years.
Wow.
And my son is going to be 10 in October.
Wow.
And he just started 5th grade, and he's going to be playing cello. Pretty proud of him.
That's beautiful, man. So, like you said, you left the farm, you left the community in hopes, I would assume, of somewhat of an easier life, if not a more freer a freer life.
Definitely more free.
And like you said, especially initially, it was anything but easy.
I'd say
harder.
I'd say it's easy. I would reluctantly, I'm going to admit that yes, my life is easier now.
Yes.
than it was in the community. But at first, it was a little iffy there. I was still working 16-hour days and still poor. And
Right.
it takes a lot when you're starting off with nothing. And I had to redo that. I had to relive that all over again a couple of years ago when my wife, she was succumbed to her addiction issues and decided to drain out all of our accounts and just leave me and my son. And it was like I had to start over all over again with nothing, literally nothing. Had to get my own bank account and start having my direct deposits put in that account and just start over again. But I feel like I've done it now, and now things are starting to get easier.
Well, I love that for you now.
Yeah.
And were there moments in those first months or years after having left the community where I can only imagine you were struck with a lot of emotions, maybe guilt or a desire to go back, or were there any of those?
Yes, especially when things got really difficult. I remember there were times when I broke down and like prayed just as a like a reflex, and I remember
Yeah.
thinking I'm praying to this God I don't even believe in anymore,
Hmm.
just out of desperation.
Yeah. Out of habit too, I would.
Yeah,
It's been so many years where that's the only thing you can do, even if you have a life-threatening illness. That's your path,
right.
man. And so, you did ultimately leave, and you obviously never went back. That's not the case for a lot of people. Even if they try to leave once or twice, a lot of them do find themselves back. Why?
Yeah, there are people that come and go like crazy.
Why do you think it's so hard to leave something like the 12 Tribes Cult, or something similar? Why is it so hard to just break free?
Everyone's experience is different. For some, it might be the religious thing calling them, like making them feel guilty and calling them back. For me, it's just the way of life. Like I, it, still to this day, it kind of appeals to me the idea that you would live in a community of people that are, you know, you're taking care of them and they're taking care of you.
Yeah,
That idea kind of appeals to me still, even today.
sure.
Like what if, like living paycheck to paycheck, what if my car breaks down and then I have, you know, who do I call for help? Who do I go to? You got to have like a network of friends and
Mm,
support, and you don't have that. Well, I don't have that.
yeah,
In the world outside the community, I don't have that same network of support that I would have within the community.
right. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because capitalism isn't really ideal either in the way that
Yeah,
it's, at least in the stage we're in today's world. We're all very in our own silos, so to speak, just trying to keep it going, to keep our food on the table, to keep our children fed. It's really hard to even make time or space to create that sense of community, even though we have free will and freedom under, in whatever terms you want that to be expressed. But so that there is that appeal that, well, it would be nice if we could create these self-sustaining communities that take care of each other. It just unfortunately seems that in most examples, at some point, corruption becomes a part of the story.
right. Yeah, I don't even know if it's possible, but
Yeah,
I feel like religion can't be part of it because
right.
everyone's experience is going to be different. Everyone's conclusions are going to be different. So,
Right. And
yeah.
in the end of the day, religion is a story. And as you mentioned, your understanding of stories as a historian, as a study of history, stories can be used in a myriad of ways and written by anyone. And
Exactly. Yeah.
they can be very seductive, they can be very illustrative, and used as, let's just call it what it is, propaganda.
Yeah. That's how I see the Bible now, especially the Old Testament. When you
Yeah.
look at how Israel wrote about their enemies, it's rather convenient that the ones writing about how God is the God of Israel are the
Mm,
Israelites, and
right.
that of course they're going to paint their enemies in a negative light.
Yeah. And that, is used by these, on a grand scheme, that something like the 12 tribes is still a relatively small community. It's considered a cult, and there's a lot of these different organizations worldwide that do these things. But you can easily make a connection to bigger parts of our society that operate in somewhat similar ways. I mean, modern politics isn't very far
Yeah.
off from creating a story to people who are in a vulnerable state.
Right. Yeah. The two party system really disturbs me. Just the fact that you can be loyal to the name.
Right,
It feels very cultish to me. Like
right,
you accept the identity that
right.
you like it becomes part of who you are. and they can change their policies. The name stays the same, and you still like stay loyal to the name.
Yes.
It's like, how far are you gonna go? How much evil are they gonna are you gonna support in the name of whatever it is you believe you are? You know, like I am. If you say I am Republican or I am Democrat, like how much like loyalty do you have to that party?
Exactly. And it's the common theme in cults is often a charismatic leader who
Right.
comes and is considered
Yeah, we've never
powerful.
seen that in America, have we?
Right. It's like interesting. I think maybe it's not just these wild, offhanded cults that are using this behavior and storytelling and whatever to get people to act a certain way. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Scary stuff for sure.
Yeah, it is. So, but you mentioned, as we kind of like wrap up here, you are living a completely different life today than you were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Yeah, no shortage of protein anymore, that's for sure. Fast food places are everywhere.
Right. Yeah, that's one I guess one win in the check mark of capitalism is you can if you have a few dollars you can eat.
Yeah.
What is your spiritual landscape like?
Not
10
none.
years removed. Yeah. And
Yeah, no, I've rejected all of it
so you
at this
consider yourself
point.
atheist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there ever still moments where you have guilt about that?
No. I feel like now I'm looking at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
and I don't see how it could. I don't know. I don't see how it could be any other way. And I wrote about that in my book. I tried to categorize it into three different categories just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
But the size of the universe, it's a big one. Like it's a really big universe, and yet when you read these spiritual holy books, it's like a small sort of narcissistic focus on wherever the people happen to be from that are writing those books.
Right.
So, if you look at the small circle of, the region that the Bible focuses on,
Yeah.
it's this tiny little dot on this big planet, but the planet itself is a tiny little dot in the solar system, and
Right.
so on and so forth. There's billions and billions of galaxies out there with billions and billions of stars, and they're going to focus on this
Right.
tiny little region. And the fact that it's just so primitive, like the
Right.
whole story is so primitive. And then there's the personal preference aspect, which I combine that with racism. I feel like racism is also like, it ties into the whole, like whatever culture or race you are, that's what you're going to prefer. So I feel like all those things kind of tie together. So
Yeah.
that's like one category in my mind: race, personal preference, and culture.
Yeah.
And they all play a part in religion. And then another category is morality versus religion, because I feel like within us we have this like this concept based on empathy and other things. Like we have this concept of what's morally correct and what's not,
Right.
and religion all too often allows people to commit these atrocities that objectively are immoral
Right.
acts. Like,
It's subverting intuitive morality in the name of a story that protects you from that act.
right, yeah, God wills it, so you can't be wrong if God wills it.
Right.
Like that's the cry of the crusader who goes to fight against this accursed race in the Middle East, and then the crusader gets there only to find that the leader of that accursed race is far more merciful than the European leaders were. And
Right.
like,
Well, it's like the story you told about the racism in the community and how their belief is that, well, if you're black, your way to salvation that you have a path, but the only path is subservience and slavery.
Right. It's
And
very subjective. Yeah.
they could sit there and say, well, I don't necessarily, that doesn't, I don't enjoy that, but it's what God says, so therefore I have to believe it. And so
Yeah.
it's
That's pretty much the place I was at too when I was,
right.
in the community and believing it.
You can sell off your own logic or emotional morality that's telling you this isn't right, but the story and God's word says it is, so therefore I'm the wrong one, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's exactly how it works.
it's crazy, man. And I was going to finish up here just by kind of asking, yeah, what, you spent a long time of your 20s just working your ass off.
And I still
And
am today.
yeah, it sounds like you
It's like
still
all
are.
for nothing.
Maybe. And maybe that's part of the acceptance of existence in a way, right? Is maybe we don't have to, there doesn't have to be a grand plan to any of this. Maybe you
Right.
can just make your own meaning out of being here. But what is something now that you do enjoy or that you're grateful for, that you're finding, the title of this podcast is Comfort in Chaos. So you're very well
I
acquainted
like
with
it.
chaos.
Yeah.
You've had a
Nice.
lot of chaos in your life. Where are you finding comfort these days? Is there a new hobby? Is there some leisure that you're able to tap into? Anything?
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate the Battle Creek area because it's like living up north. I loved nature and wilderness up there, but that's literally all it is, and you have to drive for like more than an hour to get to a
Yeah.
Walmart. It's like is insanely rural
Right.
area I was living in. But here in Battle Creek, we've got like everything we need just right down the road. But then there's so many beautiful parks here.
Mm.
And I think the people of, the city of Battle Creek, as well as the county of Calhoun, did an excellent job with blending nature and, the urban environment together
Yeah.
in such a beautiful way. There's a trail that runs through here that goes all the way up to, northern Michigan. And there's so many parks. There's the Arboretum. There's the Historic Bridge Park where there's lots of, they brought bridges from all over Michigan and put them there as part of the landscape of the park. And so you can be hiking these trails and then cross over
Wow.
you know, a rebuilt historic bridge that they
Yeah.
brought there. And it's, yeah, a lot of beautiful scenery. I take my son to the park every day. Like to go hiking a lot.
That's awesome.
I really got into like online chess. I
Oh,
haven't been
dude.
playing a whole lot lately, but
No
yeah,
way.
I like chess.
I'm a
Yeah,
big chess
it's
fan.
one of my hobbies too.
It's so addicting.
Yeah, it is. That's why I haven't been playing too much lately. Like I try to focus on doing what I have to.
Sure.
It's a busy life,
Are
but
you
yeah,
live chess or
I still like
chess.com?
chess. Chess.com.
Okay. Yeah.
I started off as my profile was not yet a cyborg, like all
Nice.
one word, and then now it's just Sinasta Colucci.
I'll have to
It's
find you.
just
I'll have to play some
yeah,
chess. I haven't played in a long time. There was a moment during quarantine that was all I was doing, and it got
me
to
too.
be
Yeah,
it got to be
and chess
unhealthy.
and gardening. Because I lived up north still during the pandemic. I got laid off my job. I had a comfortable office job for a while too, by the
Wow.
way, for 4 years.
That must have been different.
It was nice. Yeah, I would have never left, but what we sold was like souvenirs for
Okay.
touristy type places
And
all over
that
the world.
obviously jumped off a
And
cliff.
our biggest selling product was a 3D wood map. So it's like you could see the depths of like lakes and
Oh
oceans
wow.
and stuff. And obviously that wasn't seen as like an essential thing. So
Sure.
and we were selling wholesale to retailers,
Right.
and all the
Retailers just shut
non-essential
down.
retailers shut down. So yeah,
Yeah.
I got laid off, and so then I just focused on gardening and chess, and that was just what I did for you
Hey,
know, most of that
there are
year.
worse things, man, and you're very well aware of that there are worse things. But
Yeah.
that's awesome, man. Just in one last, I'm just curious, how aware is your son? I mean, he's 11 years old. You said.
Yeah, he'll be 10 in October.
Okay, 10. How aware is he of your past?
I tell him like pretty much everything, all the
Okay,
different stories.
and
He's heard me do lots of these interviews too.
right,
He's been to a few. There's some that are like in person interviews. Yeah, yeah. I think he's pretty aware of it, and like he's really good at recognizing BS when he sees
yeah, I
it.
can imagine.
Yeah,
Does he talk to you about his own feelings about it, or his own feelings about
about the community or about like the bigger grand scheme of
maybe a
things.
little bit of both, but about the community and your experiences there? Does he express like, "Oh, Dad, I hate that you went through that," or
He's never like shamed me for it.
Sure. Oh, I would hope not.
I don't know. I think he sees things more objectively than I saw when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah, I'm glad that you're able to be forthcoming with him, and it's probably for his benefit to know his own dad, and like all the aspects of your own life and who you are today, and how he can maybe use those lessons to avoid similar
Right. Yeah,
fates
that's what I was hoping
himself.
for too. And yeah, I've always been really honest with him.
Yeah.
I mean, even to the point where I didn't even teach him like I didn't even tell him, Santa Claus was real and do like we celebrate stuff. He
Yeah.
gets gifts. We celebrate holidays, and I like tell him the history behind what we're celebrating
Yeah.
instead of like trying to trying to deceive him into thinking like, yeah, these gifts came from the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. I'll just like tell him what I know of the history of all the different things that we celebrate. So
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. Again, Santa Claus and all these things is I grew up, believing in Santa Claus and all that. And I think it's mostly a harmless thing, but it is
yeah, I think so too. Is why I told him like, don't ruin it for others. But I can't lie to you.
yeah,
This is the truth of it.
yeah, you're at a point in your own life where you're like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah,
I can't do these things
yeah,
anymore. Yeah. I understand that.
exactly.
And it is one of those other things when you really start to zoom out, you're like, Santa Claus is a little culty.
Yeah, there. Unfortunately, it still affects me to this day. There's lots of things, group gatherings and such, where people do their little chants. It really disturbs me.
Yeah,
Even the whole corporate environment, it's hard for me to get behind. Yeah, I
absolutely.
work for a huge major corporation, and I'm just inundated with emails on my, on my employee email of, like corporate strong, like,
Yeah,
like it's like this feels like indoctrination. Even when they're saying something like that appeals to my side of politics, I still get like, no, I don't like this. Like
right.
this feels like I'm being brainwashed all over again.
Well, you've got pretty well crafted spidey senses for that.
Yeah, maybe overly sensitive at sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's probably not a bad thing at this point, to, yeah. Well, Sanasta, it's been really awesome to just sit and talk to you and hear a bit of your story. And thank you so much for sharing what you do have.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. And I wish you and your son many, many years of walks in the woods and good times, man.
Thank you.
All right, dude.
It's nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you. Take care. We'll see you on chess.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, later, man.
All right. Bye.
Alrighty, folks, that concludes the second and final part of the interview with Sinasta Colucci. I hope y'all enjoyed it as much as I did. I found Sinasta to just be such a wonderful guest, so kind and informative and intelligent. And I hope you guys were able to learn as much as I was in this podcast and to just extend some compassion and understanding for people who end up in situations like Sinasta's. And maybe to just spread some awareness about these communities that have this public-facing look of innocence and goodness, and there's really more that meets the eye. And we need to be able to hold these awful organizations accountable for their actions when we have the chance. So with that said, I'm going to leave some information here in the episode notes, more information on the sinister things this cult is really up to. And maybe you even have a friend or family who is caught in a situation like this. So I'm going to provide some resources for how you can address that and some people who might be helpful to reach out to. Also, I want to take a moment to once again plug Sinasta's own book, which is Better Than a Turkish Prison. That's the title of the book. And it's about his experience, his life experiences, and especially his experiences in the 12 Tribes cult. If you buy his book, you're helping support a single father who, well, let's face it, has had a pretty rough go in life. And you also just get to hear from his own account a deeper dive into his own story. So I'll have some links down in the episode notes for that as well. All right, and that's all I've got for you guys this week. Next week, I will be interviewing Molly Ray of Bonobo Relationships. She's a relationship coach who tackles a whole range of topics. She is not afraid to challenge the stereotypical norms of relationships, and frankly, I'm just very excited for that. So I look forward to seeing you guys next week, and thanks for listening to Comfort in Chaos. Cheers, y'all.